The most powerful move in any human dynamic is not the most aggressive one, not the most articulate one, and not the most emotionally compelling one. It is the one that requires the least and communicates the most. It is the deliberate, composed, unhurried decision to say nothing, need nothing, and walk away. Most people believe that influence is accumulated through presence, through speaking, through advocating, through the continuous demonstration of one's position, one's value, and one's engagement with the dynamics of any environment they inhabit. The instinct to fill silence with words, to fill absence with presence, and to fill uncertainty with explanation is among the most universally human responses to the discomfort of a situation whose resolution is not yet clear. Those who understand human nature know that this instinct, however natural its source, consistently surrenders the most strategically significant advantage available in any dynamic where influence is being distributed. Silence, what most people don't realize, is that silence is not simply the absence of speech. In any interaction, any negotiation, any relationship dynamic where the relative weight of two parties' positions is being assessed, consciously or through the automatic social calculations that human beings conduct beneath the level of deliberate thought, silence communicates something that words never quite manage to convey with the same efficiency or the same credibility. It communicates that the person maintaining it does not need the interaction to proceed in any particular direction in order to remain intact. Pay attention to what this specific communication does to the power dynamic of any interaction in which it appears, because it does something that no amount of articulate advocacy can accomplish through direct statement. It shifts the weight of the dynamic toward the person who is speaking less, because the person speaking less is demonstrating, through the quality of their silence, that their internal stability is not contingent on the conversation's outcome. And in any dynamic where influence is being distributed, the person whose stability is least contingent on the outcome holds the most consequential form of leverage available, not because they have more capability, more resources, or more social standing, but because they have removed the primary mechanism through which the other party could have managed their behavior, the need for a specific outcome. This is where the walk away as leverage creation reveals its function as the natural extension of silence into the domain of behavior. Because silence communicates internal independence from the outcome's content, from what is said, what is agreed, what is offered. The walk away communicates independence from the outcome's continuation, from whether the dynamic itself persists. Most people believe that the willingness to walk away is a tactic deployed under specific circumstances when negotiations have failed or when a situation has become definitively untenable. Those who understand human nature know that genuine willingness to walk away is not a tactic deployed in specific circumstances. It is a fundamental orientation, a genuine internalized relationship with one's own completeness that does not require any specific external arrangement to remain present. Few people understand the difference between the performance of willingness to walk away and the genuine version. But the difference is detectable to anyone paying sufficient attention, because the performed version carries a quality of waiting to be called back that the genuine version never produces. The genuine willingness to walk away removes the specific leverage that every negotiation, every relationship dynamic, and every competitive environment relies on to manage the behavior of the parties within it, the leverage of need. This connects directly to the philosophical position of never chasing, which is not simply a behavioral rule, but a statement about the nature of value and how genuine worth is perceived versus how pursued worth is inevitably perceived. Most people believe that pursuing something communicates the value they place on it, that the energy, the persistence, and the visible investment of chasing communicates to the person or situation being chased that their worth is genuinely recognized and genuinely desired. Those who understand human nature know that this belief, however logical its surface structure, consistently produces the precise opposite of its intended effect. Chasing does not communicate value, it communicates need, and need, however genuinely it reflects genuine desire, restructures the power dynamic of any relationship around the specific vulnerability of the person who needs more. Pay attention to what this restructuring produces in the perception of the chased party, because it produces something that operates automatically beneath conscious deliberation in the social psychology of virtually every human being who has ever been the object of persistent pursuit. The chased person does not experience the chase as confirmation of their value in a way that increases their regard for the person chasing. They experience it as confirmation of their superior position in the dynamic, and superior positions, once established through the behavioral evidence of who is pursuing whom, shape every subsequent interaction in the relationship through the lens of a power differential that neither party fully acknowledges, but both parties consistently feel. This is where the dignity of non-negotiation reveals its most practically significant dimension, because there are specific moments in every significant relationship and every significant environment where what is being asked of a person crosses a threshold that renders the question of how to respond strategically irrelevant, the question of whether to respond at all. Most people believe that every challenge, every inappropriate demand, and every violation of standards they hold deserves a response, that the appropriate answer to unreasonable treatment is the clear communication of what would make it reasonable, the patient explanation of what has gone wrong, and the good faith attempt to produce through dialogue the understanding that would resolve the situation. The wisest leaders recognize that this belief, however genuinely, it reflects admirable values around communication and respect, consistently misidentifies the nature of the problem in situations where the issue is not misunderstanding but deliberate disregard. When the other party understands perfectly well what the limit is and is testing whether it is genuinely held rather than performatively stated, the response that engages with the test on the test's own terms, through explanation, through negotiation, through the continued attempt to produce understanding in someone who has already understood, is not communication. It is the demonstration that the limit was negotiable all along. There is a dimension of silence that most people never consciously access, not because it requires unusual capability or exceptional discipline to reach, but because the cultural narrative around silence consistently frames it as passive, as the absence of engagement, as the space between more important activities, rather than as an activity of its own, with a specific strategic function. The function is intelligence gathering, and silence, practiced with awareness, is among the most productive intelligence gathering tools available in any human environment. What most people don't realize is that the social dynamic of silence creates a specific pressure that the vast majority of people are unable to sit with for any sustained period without doing something to relieve it. That something is almost always disclosure, the position they were considering before they were certain it was safe to state. The concern that the silence is ambiguity made feel more urgent than it would have felt if the other party had been filling the space with their own content. The genuine assessment of the situation that the managed version of themselves would never have offered in a context where they felt observed, evaluated, or engaged. Silence creates the feeling of not being observed, even when the silence itself is being maintained by someone who is observing with considerable care. Pay attention to what this produces in practice, because it produces the specific quality of information that direct questioning can never reliably generate. People answer questions with answers they have considered. They fill silence with content they have not considered carefully enough to realize. The strategic practitioner of silence, therefore, does not primarily use silence to communicate. They use it to receive, to create the conditions under which the people around them produce the most accurate available version of their genuine positions, concerns, and assessments without the management that deliberate communication always imposes on content. This is where the strategic withdrawal as positioning reveals its function as something considerably more sophisticated than the simple removal of oneself from an unfavorable situation. Most people believe that walking away from a situation represents the end of their strategic engagement with it. That departure is the conclusion of a dynamic, rather than a move within it. Those who understand human nature know that strategic withdrawal is one of the most consequential positioning tools available, precisely because departure changes the landscape of the situation from which it is made. When a capable, competent, or otherwise significant party withdraws from a situation, the situation changes. The dynamics that were organized around their presence must reorganize. The other parties must recalibrate their positions relative to an absence that they may not have anticipated, and that changes the strategic calculations they were making. The party that withdrew, meanwhile, is no longer subject to the pressures, constraints, and expectations of an environment whose current configuration was unfavorable, and is free to observe, from a position of greater clarity, how the situation reorganizes itself in their absence. Few people understand that this reorganization is often the most information-rich period of any dynamic, because the parties remaining reveal, through how they manage the absence, far more about their actual positions than they revealed while the departing party's presence was requiring them to manage their behavior toward an audience. Most people miss this warning sign because they experience withdrawal as loss, as giving something up, rather than as repositioning, as exchanging a disadvantaged presence for an advantaged absence that allows both superior intelligence gathering and, when conditions eventually favor it, re-engagement from a stronger position. This is where the economy of self-disclosure reveals its connection to silence as a sustained practice, rather than a situational tactic. What most people don't realize is that every unnecessary disclosure, every revelation of their genuine emotional state, their actual assessment of a situation, their real level of interest in an outcome, is a reduction of the informational asymmetry that constitutes one of the most reliable and most consistently available strategic advantages in any human environment. Informational asymmetry exists when one party knows more about the other's genuine position than the other knows about theirs, and in any environment where this asymmetry exists, the party with the more complete information consistently makes better decisions, because they are responding to what is actually true, while the other party is responding to an incomplete picture of what is true. Silence, as the natural behavioral expression of someone who has developed genuine discretion about what they reveal, when they reveal it, and to whom, maintains this asymmetry as a default condition of every interaction. The silent person is gathering, the disclosing person is providing, and the gap between what each party knows about the other's genuine position grows, steadily and compoundingly, in the silent person's favor. This is where never begging reveals its structural dimension as something considerably deeper than a matter of personal dignity, though it is that as well. Most people believe that the persistent explanation, the repeated justification, and the ongoing attempt to persuade someone who has already indicated their position is simply the natural behavior of someone who genuinely cares about an outcome and is unwilling to accept a negative result without exhausting every available avenue of influence. Those who understand human nature know that this behavior, however genuine its emotional source, communicates something specific to the person receiving it, something that permanently restructures the power dynamic between them in a direction that subsequent behavior will find extraordinarily difficult to reverse. It communicates that this person's decision about you carries more authority over your internal experience than your own decision about yourself. And this communication, made not through any single explicit statement, but through the accumulated behavioral evidence of persistent pursuit, repeated explanation, and the ongoing willingness to submit one's position to another person's continued evaluation, installs a power differential that the other party will navigate from for as long as the behavioral pattern that created it continues. Pay attention to what the cessation of this behavior produces, because it produces something that most people who have been operating from a position of persistent explanation and repeated justification never anticipate. Not simply the relief of no longer doing something exhausting, but the specific social dynamic that follows when the person who was persistently seeking is observed to have stopped. The person who was receiving the pursuit suddenly finds themselves in a position they were not operating from before. The confirmation of their superior position in the dynamic, which the pursuit was continuously providing, has been withdrawn, and its withdrawal raises a specific and uncomfortable question. That the pursuit is continuation was making it unnecessary to consider. What does their departure mean about their assessment of this situation? This is where the compounding effect of consistent silence produces its most lasting reputational consequence. Not in any single interaction, but across the accumulated pattern of many interactions, many situations, and many moments in which the discipline of silence was maintained where most people would have spoken. Most people build their reputations through what they say and do in the moments that feel most significant. Those who understand human nature know that reputations, the durable, compelling, genuinely influential kind, are built through the consistency of what a person does across the full range of moments, including and especially the ones that most people would have treated as too minor to manage deliberately. The person who maintains composure when a small provocation arrives, who does not over-explain when a brief response would have been sufficient, who departs without the extended farewell that most people produce to manage the discomfort of their own leaving, who does not fill every available conversational space simply because it is available to be filled. Each of these moments, individually, produces no dramatic impression. Cumulatively, across sufficient time and sufficient observation, they produce something that no single impressive performance could have established with the same credibility. The impression of someone whose internal life does not require external management, and that impression, accumulated rather than performed, built from consistency rather than from occasion, is the specific reputational signal that the most genuinely formidable people have always carried into every room before they have said a single word. This is where the return from silence reveals the specific leverage position that all the preceding principles were building toward, because everything that strategic silence, the dignified non-negotiation, the genuine willingness to walk away, the economy of disclosure, and the compounding reputational consistency we're building, has been building toward one specific outcome: the position of maximum leverage at the moment of potential re-engagement. Most people who return from a period of silence, absence, or withdrawal return with the specific anxiety of someone who is uncertain about how their return will be received, who enters the re-engagement carrying the weight of wondering whether the silence communicated what they hoped it would, and whether the other party's response will confirm or disconfirm that hope. The person who practiced the preceding principles returns with something entirely different. They return with the specific knowledge that the other party spent the period of their absence constructing a narrative about what the absence meant, and that the narrative constructed in genuine uncertainty about another person's internal state always attributes more significance, more deliberateness, and more authority to the absent party than any amount of active presence and active communication could have established through direct means. The returning person does not need to explain where they were. They do not need to justify the duration of the absence. They do not need to manage the other party's response to the return, because the other party's imagination, working in genuine uncertainty across the period of absence, has already done the most consequential work of the return strategy before the return has even occurred. The leverage is not created by the return, it was created by everything that came before it: the silence, the composure, the genuine willingness to walk away, the economy of disclosure that left the other party with an incomplete picture of who they were actually dealing with, and the accumulated reputational signal of someone whose internal life was never available to be managed from the outside. Most people miss this principle because they are focused on what to say when they return, rather than on what the return itself communicates, on the content of the re-engagement, rather than on the position from which it is being made. The hidden reason the position matters more than the content is that the content will be interpreted through the lens of the position, and the position established through everything described in this video is among the most consequential available. The position of someone who left and returned, not because they needed to, but because they chose to. That distinction is everything. The wisest leaders recognize that true influence begins not when others cannot easily leave, but when you genuinely can, and that the specific authority communicated by someone who could walk away at any moment but has chosen, for their own reasons, not to yet, is the most compelling authority available in any human dynamic. Power rarely announces itself, and the power of someone who has genuinely mastered the disciplines described in this video never announces itself at all. That understanding is the foundation. Everything else follows from it.